So this is the bunk area. Instead of sleeping under the eaves altogether, now we sleep two to a bunk.
When you say two to a bunk, you mean, look at this.
Two men.
Two men in each, oh man.
Yes, yes.
That's cozy.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
As much as I'd worry about fights out there in the kitchen, I'd worry more right here.
Well, maybe you wanted to have, maybe you chose your bunkmate early on.
Yeah, really. No, you can't spoon.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. We're traveling in time and space today, going back 200 years and going north about 100 miles. We're at the Patten Lumbermen's Museum, where Rhonda Brophy is about to show me the history of logging in Maine. It's brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Bar Harbor Whale Watch, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Of course, European colonists started logging the moment they arrived around 1600. The first ship was built in Popham in 1607. In 1634, the first water-powered sawmill was built in South Berwick. Of course, prior to the American Revolution, you weren't allowed to cut down the tall pines. Those belonged to the King of England as masts for the Royal Navy. All of that happened along the southern and coastal edges of Maine. It wasn't until after the War of 1812 that the Maine Northwoods felt the first axe, because up until then, fights between the French and English and their tribal allies made it just too dangerous to go there. So logging in the interior part of the state didn't really get going until Maine separated from Massachusetts in 1820. So, let's go to Patten.
And we're on location. Rhonda Brophy is here with me outside Patten Lumbermen's Museum. First of all, hi, Rhonda.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Hi. There are other lumberman museums in Maine. Is this the best one?
Of course, I think it is. Not everybody may think that, but we do have a lot of special artifacts here that other museums don't. Mm-hmm. This is our reception center, and it was built mainly with the help of volunteers and the board of directors about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And as you can tell by the traffic going by, this is the route into the north part of Baxter State Park, plus all the other stuff that happens down this road.
Exactly.
So, Lumbermen's Museum, did anyone in Maine ever call them lumberjacks?
That was more of a Western term. I think it has been used, but lumberjacks were traditionally the ones who wore the spikes on the boots and climbed the trees and cut them from the top.
So we're outside. The Patten Lumbermen's Museum has a Lombard log hauler across the road. Is that the... My experience with Lombards is that every model is really different. They kept fooling with it the whole time it existed.
Ours is from the Sherman Lumber Company. It's one of the later ones. I'm not sure just what number it is because the brass plate that numbered them on the front is missing. But this was in a shed, but made it very hard to see, and we felt that it's such a significant part of history that it needs to be out in the open where people can see it, and it brings attention to the museum. Of course, it was the first cleat track ever patented, and there were only 83 of them manufactured. So when I say it's a later number, I would say it's in the 70s somewhere. The first ones were a little rougher than that.
When you look back at the history of these things, and that's what tanks were created out of those tracks.
This track, this weighted forward called cleat track, was sold to the Army. The patent was sold. Alvin Lombard had the patent on it, and he sold it to the Army, and then it went to Holt Caterpillar. Any cleat track that you see today is off the patent of this machine, and this is registered in the National Historic Engineering as a National Historic Engineering Landmark. It
looks like one of, I'm going to say newer ones, obviously it's old, but it is one of the more recent models because it's a little bigger and a little firmer.
Firmer, yeah, that's a good word. I think the first ones were very shaky.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people jumped off the first ones.
Now, does this one have brakes?
No.
No, none of them had brakes.
None of them had brakes at all.
I mean, who in his right mind would drive one of those things with tons of logs behind him downhill without brakes?
Well, they relied on
jumping.
Well, jumping, and they have what they called snubbers that would hold it back a little bit, or they would have people go out, or men go out and put straw and hay down to slow it down. And you know, and of course the roads are iced down so that they go smoother. Hay and straw would be very important.
Oh man.
It's fun to think about having to rely on something like that as opposed to brakes.
Yeah, really. I mean, how many lumbermen live to an old age? Not that many.
But the few that did have great stories to tell.
Well, let's head inside and we can start to tell a few of those stories and look around.
So we're coming into our reception center, and this was newly built about 10 years ago. And it's just provided a great place to welcome guests that come in. We have a great art display. We have old photographs, over 1,000 old photographs of probably 1850 to early 1900s. We have some artwork that's been donated to us. Our reception desk, information about the museum and the area.
And you have your own fundraising events here as well. There's a bean dinner coming up?
We do have that. That will be on August 12th this year, and we do 16 pits of whole beans. They're put in the ground on Friday afternoon. They're pulled out about noontime on Saturday. We do a big biscuit fire, which the girls make the biscuits, and we put them in reflector ovens, and we cook them right there where people can see. We do the traditional Maine red hot dogs, boiled. I don't know if Lumbermen had those or not. Oh, we have the boiled coffee, we have gingerbread and coleslaw.
Okay. Well, most of the reception center is new stuff. It's books, it's T-shirts, it's things to buy, it's souvenirs. Most of the exhibits, I presume, are in the outbuildings out back?
Yes, they are.
Okay. So let's just wander through here real briefly. There are photos and pictures and paintings on the wall. Do they tell a story?
They tell a bit of the story. A lot of them depict what it was like at the time. This photo displayed down on this back wall is hauling the logs across, I believe, Millinocket Lake. I don't have all the photos up, but you can see the bateaus that were used, the size of the logs that filled the lake. This is a towboat pulling the logs across the lake.
That's amazing.
We have old pictures of the camps, and those were really, fascinating to look at when you look at how rustic they were.
So these bateaus, I've never been in one that was floating. They don't look like they would float. They look dangerous.
But they do float, and they float very well, and you can put quite a few people in them.
I guess. Every time I see one, I say, that's a death trap. But of course, they used a lot of horses back then. When they didn't have the Lombards, they hauled a lot out with the horses.
That's right. The Lombard actually took the place of the horses in the woods, and actually they started out with oxen and mules.
Other souvenirs here, you have a 1940 Western Electric telephone. They had phones. Did they have phone wires? How did they get it?
They did have wires. If you go into the North Woods, there's wires hung from trees and little insulators, and they used to run wires all through the woods. Here's a picture. This is Mishu Farm, and you can see the phones on the wall there. That was their communication.
They didn't have radio.
No. When they ran the Lombards, they had to have communication like that because they had two roads, and so they would tell when the Lombards were going out so the other ones could come back the other road.
It's like CB Channel 19
now.
Yes,
yes, that's what it would be.
All right, let's just take a quick look at some of these other photos. Most of them are just workers posing.
Yes.
And I'm just looking to see what it is they're wearing. Is there a particular... I mean, where did the clothing come from? Because it looks like it was all designed for lumbermen.
A lot of the clothing was probably... sewn at home by their wives early on. In Patten, there was a large station, I guess you would call it, an employment station, and the men would come in from out of town, they would register, they would go across the road to Rose's store. He would outfit them with what they needed to go into the woods, and when they came out in the spring, they would pay him. So the stores started carrying the clothes that were needed. Clothes, equipment, supplies.
Was there a bath day once a week? What did they do?
In the early days, I don't think so. I think when they were in the woods, they were in the woods. There's old renditions of stories talking about, everybody sleeping under one blanket, which I'll take you out to the 1820 camp, and that's basically what they did. They slept on, hay bales or pine boughs, whatever they could find. They all slept under the eaves, with whatever, so they didn't undress, and they used their boots as pillows.
Yeah, and they must have been so tired. So
it didn't matter. That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. It was work.
Yeah. I wonder if they ever had one guy who snored that the other guys hated.
I'm sure they did. How could they not?
Exactly.
We have that nowadays.
Think about it. You never had to worry about bears. They could smell you coming 5 miles away. I'm at the Patten Lumbermen's Museum. Rhonda Brophy is my guide, and the next thing she's going to explain to me is, why is there a muskrat fur coat hanging right here in the center? This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. We're at the Lumbermen's Museum in Patten. So much of Maine's history is all about the trees. The first steam-powered mill was built in Bath during the year Maine became a state in 1820. That was the same year the first tote road was built up here in the woods, connecting Patten to East Branch River. Before that, they had to pole their supplies upstream. We're in the visitor center at the museum.
There's a lot of fur coats hanging up. Why?
Well, there's a story to this bear coat we're looking at. This was John Twitchell's, and he had a blacksmith shop in town. When he proposed to his to-be wife, he gave her this coat over on this wall. It is a muskrat coat.
They're wanting one of those.
Yeah. So the granddaughter, which I have a picture of, when she's in her 90s, she knows the end of life is coming. She wanted her grandmother's coat to be reunited with her grandfather's coat. So she sent it from Florida up to us.
And that's a muskrat coat. Yes. There's two other coats hanging over there.
One is a sheepskin, I believe, that was donated, and one is a more luxurious, I'm not sure what kind it is. It could be mink, I don't know. But just to show the difference in how we advanced.
Yeah. There are snowshoes and old skis against the wall.
Yes.
Were those typically used around logging?
Yes, the snowshoes especially.
Yeah. There's a fiddle, a really old fiddle on the wall. Did they do that much in camp?
They did, with no TV, cell phones, all of that. They did a lot of poetry. There's a lot of poems written, stories, ballads. They also played any kind of instrument that they could create, and fiddles happened to be one of them. They did a lot of fiddling. They did a lot of clog dancing to stay entertained.
Yeah. Where do they find the energy after a day hacking down trees and hauling them out?
Well,
you'd have to wonder.
Yes.
We have firearms in the wall over here in this exhibit.
Yes, those were donated to us. These are different types of guns, and
these are
pistols,
cool.
Yes, were used on the Matagamon stagecoach.
So there was a stagecoach up here in the woods.
Yes, there was. Yes, there was. That was one of the, a major form of transportation. The train was another.
Yeah, really? Was it a busier place up here, do you think?
It was very, very busy, yes.
All right, then. Let's head right out.
Okay.
So you have a lot of outbuildings, and some of them look old.
Some of them are pretty old. They're not as old as the old camps used to be. I'll take you over first to the 1820 camp, which is a replica, but it's probably been here 40 years. It is starting to sag a little bit. You want to just cut across the lawn?
Sure.
It's starting to sag a little bit, but it shows how a camp would have been built in the 1800s when they first started logging in the area. They would come up the rivers to a stand of pine and settle in October, November. They would build the camp, and then they would begin harvesting. They had to stay fairly close to the rivers because that was how they transported the logs in the springtime with the runoff. Usually the camps were built without nails. They had augers, and they would drill and peg the logs going up through. They would have a froe and a mallet, and they would cut the shingles from the cedar to make shingles on the roof. Inside, it was always a gravel floor. They didn't bother with floors. They had a cooking fire in the center, rocked up, and they always left an opening in the roof so that the smoke would go out. This was their heat also for the winter.
So when it got down to 20 or 30 below zero, they would still have the opening.
Yes. Yep. Yes, and that's why I think they slept with their clothes on. I don't think they got too undressed.
How many men would be in here typically?
Probably 8 to 12.
Yep. And and this is probably about 20 feet by 20 feet, but the ceiling is barely over head height. You weren't going to use more logs than you had to.
No, I mean, they wanted to get their shelter up as quickly as possible so they could begin work. They always had a long log cut in half, and they called that a deacon's bench. I am not sure where that phrase has come from. I haven't been able to find the answer to that. But a sharpening stone was always very important to have with them because that kept their axes sharp.
Yeah. Did they do that right in the cabin, or did they have outbuildings for that too?
They had a hovel for the horses, but I think most of them kept them right in the cabin because they could do it while dinner was being prepared, if you want to call this type of preparing dinner.
Beans?
Yeah, probably a lot of beans and wild game.
Did they have to cook for themselves, or did they have people who cooked for them?
In the early days, in the 1820s, 30s, I think they did their own cooking. as time went on, and more men, once they discovered the amount of wood in this area and the amount of pine and spruce that was valuable, bigger camps came into existence. This is we call a double camp, because it has a separate cooking area from the sleeping area. In the center, it's called a dingle, and that's an odd word also that I've been trying to... In Ireland, and I think a lot of the lumbermen came from Ireland because of the potato famine. In Ireland, the head works to a field or whatever where they put all their extra stuff, the rocks, the brush, was called the dingle area. So I'm thinking maybe because they stored things in this center part, that's where dingle came from.
Okay. So this is a double building. This is obviously much taller too.
Yes, it is. Because now, like I said, now we have many people in the woods working. Because like I said, it just exploded when they found out how much pine was in this area.
Why was pine so valuable compared to all the other wood that's up here?
They used, well, in England, they used the pine for the masts on the tall ships.
But this would be a long way to get.
It didn't matter. We were still under English rule at that time. So that, I think, played into it.
It would have been a long way to get the logs down to the ocean, though.
Well, they would go from the rivers and streams. Like I said, they would always build a camp next to a river or a stream. It would go into the Penobscot, and the Penobscot went to Bangor. Bangor became the lumbering capital of the world in the early 1900s.
Yeah, Sin City.
Yes, it was. They always had a rule in the logging camps that there was no talking at the table.
Why is that? Just so they wouldn't argue, or do you have any idea?
That was it. That was part of it. There wouldn't be fights. Plus, the cook wanted them in and out as quickly as possible.
Did they eat in shifts?
No, they would usually just come in.
Okay.
I mean, the cook slept, had bunks in the corner. The cook slept right here in the kitchen because they did 4 meals a day, one very, very early in the morning, 2 during the day, and 1 in the evening.
There had to be a pecking order among the crew as to...
I'm sure there was.
And the cook had to be pretty high up there.
The cook was the best paid of all the men working in the woods, because if you didn't have a good cook, the men were not going to work as hard.
And they wouldn't come back.
They wouldn't come back, that's right.
Probably more important than the foreman.
Well, the foreman didn't really stay in camp a lot. The boss was, he'd come in, check on things, and leave.
I went to the Churchill Dam shindig last year.
I did too.
Yeah, I thought I saw you there. So, and one of the stories I heard was that you would work for a bad boss, but not a bad cook.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
That's funny.
Food was so important. They needed the calories to keep their energy up. And of course, they have calendars of pretty ladies. I mean, they were typical men.
They must have got pretty lonely there towards the end of winter.
I would think so. This is a sled that they use to take the lunches out to the men. This is a photo. Well, you can't see because, but they would load the lunches onto the sled and take them out to where the men were working for lunch.
Well, every time you take down a tree, you move one step further away from camp.
True.
At some point, everything around here must have been missing its trees, and they had to move.
Yes. Oh yeah, they moved. Oh, once they cut an area, and old camps like the 1820 camp, and I tell people ours is getting rough looking, but they left them in the woods just to rot.
Right.
I mean, they did not bother to try to move them.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. We're at the Patten Lumbermen's Museum. We just hit the 1820 camp a moment ago, where all the loggers slept side by side along one wall of the tiny cabin. Now we're in the double camp, with a kitchen on one side, a dingle in the middle, and the sleeping quarters on the other side. Even though these larger camps are bigger, the sleeping arrangements haven't gotten any better, as you'll see in a moment. You're listening to Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. We're in Patten at the Lumbermen's Museum. Our guide is Ron DeBrophy. In the very early 1800s, each man had to get his own logs downriver. It wasn't until 1825 that they started ganging them up to cross lakes and booming them to sort them out down around Old Town and Argyle and the Penobscot River. By 1832, Bangor was the largest shipping port for white pine in the world. Right now, on my tour up here in the woods, we're in a recreated double camp. a log house with a kitchen wing and a bedroom wing. And it's a pretty small space for sleeping.
Now, this is the bunk area. Instead of sleeping under the eaves all together, now we sleep two to a bunk.
When you say two to a bunk, you mean like
two men. Two men
in each. Oh man.
Yes. Yes.
That's cozy.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
As much as I'd worry about fights out there in the kitchen, I'd worry more right here.
Well, maybe you wanted to have, maybe you chose your bunkmate early on.
Yeah, really. No, you can't spoon. That's alarmingly cozy.
I'm not even going there. They didn't have running water. They would, hollow out a sink or whatever, and this was where they would wash up. One towel, and this was on a roller, so that when it got wet, you just pulled it down around and let it dry, and just kept using it over and over.
Yeah. So big cast iron stove in here would have been enough to keep them at least marginally warm.
Yes.
And since they never really undressed.
Undressed a lot. No, that's right. But as time went on, things did get a little bit more civilized, and they were taking baths, at least once a week.
Well, there was more than a century of logging in the area.
Yes.
How much did things change over time? Obviously, the camps got bigger, the infrastructure got bigger, they got telephone communication.
I would say it's not changing as much as quickly as it is right now. But you stop and think about it, in 1820, they were sleeping on hay and boughs. And then they went to double camps. Everything advanced. The farms were created in the woods because it was easier to grow the food for the men and the livestock than it was to get into town to get it. So that was an advancement. Chainsaws came, buck saws, chainsaws, everything advanced mechanically also. We went from the horses to the Lombard log hauler, then into the skidders. Now we're into harvesters, I guess they call them, where one man sits in a cab and can
computer runs everything.
And a computer runs everything. It's air conditioned, and they can cut what it probably would have taken 100 men 100 years ago. They can cut in a day what it took them a winter to cut.
Yep. The other camp was the 1820 camp. About when this one?
This is about 1850 to 60.
Okay. One of the reasons we talk about 1820 is there wasn't a lot going on before that, because until after the French and Indian War, or the War of 1812 rather, it wasn't safe to be up here.
That's right. And the other thing, Patten got his name from Amos Patten. He was a lumberman down in the Bangor area. He and some of his surveyors had come up to Mount Katahdin, and when they hiked Mount Katahdin, they could see the vastness and the pine that was here. So he sent his surveyors up to start actually developing this area, and that's how Patten got its name.
Yeah. Okay, let's hit another building.
This is when we have to introduce you to another member. Carol Bates is a retired game warden. He grew up in this area, and now he volunteers as the lumber encampment blacksmith. We're stepping into another tiny log cabin with a dirt floor, and we're surrounded by metalworking tools, a couple of anvils, an assortment of horseshoes line the near wall.
Now, obviously, you do demonstrations in here on a regular basis?
Whenever we have a school group, I do it, the demonstrations for the log drivers' dinner in August, and whenever they need me.
Blacksmiths were extremely important
during
the time of lumbering.
At one time, the town of Patten had 5 blacksmith shops, and the town of Patten, took care of everything west of Patten, clear to the Canadian border. Sleds, wagons, horse harness, horseshoes, the whole.
How did it work back then? Was it a blacksmith shop in town, or did the blacksmith take a show on the road and go out and do it in camps?
There were both. There were both. The shops here in town were all 1 or 2 man shops, and they were permanent. Also, there was a blacksmith in the lumber camps. Usually they done the horse shoeing and repaired all the sleds, wagons, whatever. Plus, most of the time they done the horse doctoring, and even cut hair and pulled a tooth if you needed it.
So the horseshoes, did they make them and then bring them into the woods, or did they make them on the spot?
Early days, horseshoes were made by hand. Probably after the Industrial Revolution, shortly after the Civil War, they were factory made, but they still had to be sized. Horses are like people. They have different size feet and different shape feet.
Yep, number 9 EEE.
Yeah,
okay.
Right, right. The shoes came in sizes.
Yep.
So they still had to have a forge and heat the shoe and bend it to make it to fit the horse's foot.
Yep. Where'd the coal come from?
The coal, most of the coal came from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
There was a famous vein of coal, the Pocahontas vein in Pennsylvania, that produced the very best blacksmith coal. But I have heard in the old days, alderwood, charcoal, they'd make their own charcoal.
Well, that, I guess that was my next question, is did they use anything besides coal?
Right.
Charcoal came to mind, but I didn't know if it got hot enough.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of it, and it takes a lot of air.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like coal.
Yeah.
But other than that, they made do with what they had.
So you basically soften up the metal and then bang it into shape?
That's it. The hotter it gets, the softer it is, to the point where it melts, and then you've lost everything.
Right. Okay, so when you do a demonstration in here, what is it you're building? You're making nails, horseshoes?
Usually I make little small stuff that goes quick to where people can see progress. And lately I've been making a few little small simple bracelets for the young ones. But I don't do anything very big in a demonstration.
All the tools in the wall, are they all antiques, or were they made recently?
They were all antiques. When I took over the shop here, I think they were mostly relics.
Yeah.
They were bent and abused, and as I worked the forge here, I took one or two at a time and straightened them, and now they're all functional.
Now, what would you call those? Because they look like pliers, but they're not.
Tongs.
Tongs, okay.
They're tongs.
And there's a whole different variety of tongs.
Yes, they are. Some of the old blacksmiths had hundreds of pair of tongs, and only they knew
what each one was for.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are called bolt tongs, and the reason they're built is so that you can go over the head of a bolt and hold them. And they came in all different sizes.
Yeah. Now, were these manufactured somewhere else, or do they make them themselves? All these tools.
Both.
Yep.
Both. A lot of these tongs. This is not one. These were factory made. If you can find a pair of handmade ones here, they're all made out of little scrap pieces that the blacksmith throwed aside, and when he got a rainy day or he wasn't busy, he made tongs and he made the reins, welded them all.
The anvils, they wouldn't make those. Those look like they're manufactured somewhere.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Because that's huge.
Most of the anvils you see, I would guess, not most, but 70% were made in England. And they, when they come over for a load of lumber or whatever, they'd put them as ballast in the bottom of the ship. They'd bring a load of anvils. But this one here was made in Long Island, New York. That's a Fisher anvil. They started out in Newport, Maine.
Oh, okay.
Shortly after the Civil War, but they only made anvils there a couple of years, and then they went to New York.
I'm thinking of Katahdin Iron Works. Did we make our own iron in this area at that time?
Yeah. That was an iron operation. I think around the Civil War, around the 1860s.
It was early, yeah.
At that time, of course, America was blooming and growing, and the war effort, and they were trying to get the railroad across the United States. So those were busy times. So
needed a lot of iron.
Yeah,
in wood.
Yeah. So Maine furnished a lot of stuff for them, and a lot of men.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you, Carol.
All right, you're entirely welcome.
Carol Bates. He's the blacksmith at the Patten Lumbermen's Museum. We'll head to the Sawmill next. For me, it's the next building just 30 feet away. I'll meet you there in about 3 minutes, and we can take a look at the evolution of power from steam to gasoline and from handsaws to chainsaws. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. We're at the Patten Lumbermen's Museum. My guide is Rhonda Brophy, and we're in the Sawmill building. The first steam-powered sawmill was built in Hamden in 1835. By 1850, there'd be 36 of them in the state. Counting all types of sawmills, there were 1,500 of them in Maine around that time, and 250 of those were north of Bangor.
So we're inside the sawmill. There had to be a transition between when they did steam power to maybe gasoline. They may have used water power in certain areas.
Yes.
There had to be different styles of getting energy to power these things. So what do we have for examples in here? I can see at least one engine that would have been diesel or gas powered.
Yes, we have a shingle mill. We have a lot of chainsaws, the old-fashioned Sally saws, or, you know, they were modern at the time. A one-lunger engine over in the corner. Of course, those were very useful at one time. We have an axe collection, chainsaws, the two-man, one-man.
Well, when did chainsaws come along? Because they were doing it by hand, and then something happened. Chainsaws would have come along in the 1900s, I would think.
I would say so, yes.
Certainly wasn't
probably,
in 1800s.
You know, I think 1930s they were very useful. They were used a lot at that time.
I wonder if they could keep theirs running, because I can't keep mine running.
I think they had to know their chainsaws like their vehicles. You know, they knew every little, if it sputters, what's going on and how to fix it.
And they must have had to sharpen a lot.
A lot, yes. Yeah, because it would have been like the axes. If they weren't sharp, they just wouldn't produce the wood that they needed.
And you're working too hard for nothing.
Yes.
How did they get paid? Did they get paid by the hour? Get paid by the load of logs?
Early on, it was paid by the day. You know, when they went in, it was paid by the day. And I think probably, I don't know just when it started changing over. This is a pit saw. This is when they first started making dimensional lumber. And to do that, they would dig a hole in the ground, roll the logs over. One man would be in the pit, one man on top, and they would saw up and down all day. And that made the first flat lumber.
Wow. I would not want to be the guy underneath.
No. Do you think that's where, you know, being down in the pits or being in the pits came from? It could be, but
all of this was exceptionally dangerous.
Yes, it was. Very much so. Very much so. The old saws, the one we saw down on the end with the big saw blade, there were no guards on them. I think there were a lot of accidents.
Did they keep records of how many people died, or they just...
Records are very hard to come by for things like that. I think when it happened, a lot of the lumbermen were transient people that, you know, would go from town to town to town, so there were no relatives really to contact.
Did they come from all over the U.S. to do it in the winter, or was it, well, was the U.S. at that time?
Yes.
Or was it more like a New England thing, or do we have any idea?
I would say it was all over, and actually a lot of the lumbermen from Maine, they were called Bangor Tigers, they went out west to show the western logging operations how to do it, and how they were excellent on the rivers and knew how to do the log drives and could run across those logs. So they were very well known and useful when they went west.
And even today, we send our people out there to put out fires.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Today's show is coming to you from the Patten Lumbermen's Museum. Ron DeBrophy is my guide. We've got just enough time to hit 2 more buildings, and we'll meet you over at the Horse Hovel next. If you're ever planning your own visit, it's easy. Just go to Patten, make the turn toward the north entrance of Baxter State Park, and the museum is less than a half a mile down the road on the right. It'll cost you $10, and it'll be worth every penny. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, coming to you today from Patten. We're at the Lumbermen's Museum, and Ron DeBrophy is showing us around. By 1860, tanning was Maine's 3rd largest industry. In 1868, the first pulp mill was built in Maine. Give yourself an A if you knew it was in Topsom. It was 1883 when Old Town got its first pulp mills. So, Rhonda, 2 more buildings. What are these?
This is the West Shed, or the horse hovel we call it. We keep the horse-drawn equipment. The next one is the original building where the museum started in 1963. If you look at the logs on the outside, they're all hand-hewed. There was a cabin on the base of Mount Chase that was donated, brought over and reassembled.
Well, this was a museum for a long time, because I remember decades ago driving by it.
1963 was when it was incorporated as a nonprofit. And as you can tell, some of these buildings are very, very old.
Yes.
And in rough shape. But this is a two-horse drag saw. And it's very interesting because it's a treadmill that the horses would walk on, and hooked to the pulleys and levers and everything was the blade, and it would cut wood.
Wow, 2 horsepower.
2 horse.
Yeah. Now, when you say this was a hovel, is this where they would keep the horses as in a barn, or?
Kinda, yeah. We've got it set up like that. We have some dioramas of the Allagash River towboat, and a lot of oddities, a lot of horse things. They collected, you know, of course, the taxidermist part of it. You know, the antlers, the caribou racks. We have a lot of boom chains. People are always bringing us boom chains they find in the lakes.
They find more and more all the time, I bet.
All the time, yes. So in this building, I love the squeaky screen door.
Really? It sounds so authentic.
It does, doesn't it?
That just makes good radio.
So this building, we have a little section of the tramway that's out between Eagle Lake and Chamberlain. We have more dioramas. Tools. These are all tools that were used through the ages. We've had whole toolboxes donated to us. In this room, it goes back into the chainsaws again. This is a big bow saw. Different types of 2-man saws. Sally saw. This is a gasoline-operated drag saw. I had a gentleman from Quebec come and take pictures of this. They had gotten one and they were going to restore it.
We must have made a lot of tools in Maine at the time. PV certainly is something that is sort of...
Absolutely. Yeah. It's synonymous with Maine.
It really is, yeah. So you got that. How about saws and other tools, hatchets, axes, that sort of thing?
Absolutely.
Made them all?
Yes. There were quite a few axe companies, not so much in northern Maine, but maybe down in central Maine. And of course the PVs. There was actually statutes that you couldn't wear your spiked boots into restaurants, on trains, places where they would do damage.
Why did they have spiked boots? Was it to walk on the water, on the logs?
It was the logs. It was to catch on the logs.
Right, yeah.
I can show you a pair out here.
So it wasn't as if it was ice in the woods they were worried about.
No,
okay.
And they were made by Bass in Wilton, Maine.
Yeah.
There's a boot down there with the cocks. And they
were, geez, look at that.
Yeah, and these are the cocks, and here's a jar of them. And they would just screw into the bottom of the boot.
Okay.
But it was to give them traction on the logs as they were going down the river.
People fell in.
Absolutely, I'm sure many of them did. We have a section of surveying tools, and every company had their own way of surveying or measuring their wood. Always to their advantage, I'm sure. These are some of the large logs or the large planks. It shows how big the trees were at one time.
And these are the ones they would saw by hand with one guy on top, one below.
You can see the marks in them. All the logs had loggers' marks in them or company marks, so that when they got to Bangor, they were put in sorting bins. So everybody could get credit for their own.
Yeah. At the end of the day, somehow somebody had to get paid.
Yes, they did. And it was usually the boss.
Yeah, right.
And then he filtered it down from there.
Just like they do today.
Yes. So the Lombard shed, which now our steam-powered Lombard is across the road in its own building.
But you've got more than one Lombard.
We do. We have the next generation gasoline Lombard.
There are people in the state who have a Lombard, but not many who have multiple Lombards.
Have both, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a gasoline Lombard. I believe this was used out by LaCroix on Chamberlain Lake.
I was going to say.
Okay. We have some old trucks. This is a bateau.
Yeah, that's a death trap.
No, it isn't. This one actually has a motor on it. We have some old Ellison motor toboggans, or early snowmobiles, I guess, if you want. Aren't they amazing?
That is ancient. Yes. That may be the oldest machine. 1940, early 40s, it says. Yeah. Wow. I mean, I've seen some old machines in some
these are
museums.
used by Al Nugent out at Chamberlain.
I mean, you wouldn't even call it a snow sled or a snowmobile.
No,
this really
but they
was.
Are, but I mean, look, it's got the little seats,
yep.
and they're snow toboggans. They're referring to them as.
Yeah.
Because but it's pretty close to a snowmobile, the early snowmobile. This is a water cart, and in the days early on, they would take this out. You can see the barrel up at the top, and they would dip the barrel into the spring or lake or whatever they were near water. And these pegs, they would go out and ice down the road so that the sleds could go a little bit easier. Then this is a snow plow, and it cut the grooves for the sleds to go in.
I wonder if there was more snow then.
Oh, that's debatable. Everybody says there is.
Yeah.
I don't know. They talk about the telephone lines, but I think the lines were a lot shorter too. The poles were shorter, the telephone, because they say, oh yeah, we could stand up on the snowbank and touch the line.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think the poles were shorter also.
Yeah, because you're not going to put them up high, because who wants to carry a ladder and do it tree by tree?
Exactly.
And it's easier to just repair them when a tree limb knocks them down than string them up too carefully.
Right. This is an old Holt tractor, because again, it's got the weighted cleat track.
Do either of these Lombards run?
No.
Okay.
And they won't. The steam Lombard is missing a couple major parts, and that takes a lot of money to redo the boiler. You have to have special licensing for it to even, someone to even run it.
Yeah. So we're back out inside of the museum. What's your season? When should people come visit you?
We open Memorial Day weekend. And we're open right through to Columbus Day, which is October 10th, I believe, this year we will close. We're open 6 days a week. We're closed on Mondays, 10 to 4. But we actually have a festival before we open. We have the Fiddlers and Fiddlehead Festival. This will be our 4th year of doing this, and we have different musicians come in, play music. We have people bring us fiddlehead dishes from all over the northern Maine. We have a competition like the Iron Chef type, who can make the best fiddlehead dish. From there we choose 2 contestants, and we have mystery baskets. They have to create a dish in 10 minutes, and then they're judged, and they get the fiddlehead frying pan of the year or whatever.
When is that? I so want to do that.
That is the third Saturday in May.
No kidding. Okay.
Always the third Saturday in May. It's like our bean dinner's the second Saturday in August. The Fiddlers and Fiddlehead Festival, which coincides very well with when the fiddleheads are ready. We have a lot of vendors set up. We have a big craft fair. We probably have 30 or 40 crafters that come in and show their wares.
When people come to visit you, there's an admission price.
Yes, there is.
School groups can come in. I presume
yes,
they can book ahead of time.
And if it's in their budget, I do a very reduced rate of $2. And if it's not in their budget, we encourage them to come anyways, and we would not charge them. We don't charge our local schools for that. I try to have a little bit of advance notice so that I can have tour guides. I have trained tour guides that I put in each building, so when the groups go through, they get a very good explanation of what they're seeing.
When somebody just shows up on their own, do they get a tour guide?
It's a self-guided tour, and what I do is when they come in and register, I have a packet of information. I give them a map of the buildings, a brief explanation of what they're going to see in each building. I give them a chronology of logging history starting in the 1600s. I give them the pay scale from Great Northern, just because it's fun reading, in 1919, and an excerpt from a book called Rivers of Fortune by Bill Caldwell. And the excerpt is what it took to run a logging camp or a logging operation in the early 1900s in Patten, Maine. He has actual footage from the ledgers that he has been able to put together, and it is pretty amazing how many men, how many horses, how much food it took to supply a lumber camp.
Which is why you still see the remnants of farms in the woods.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. I mean, we're on the northern entrance to Baxter State Park. The road is also the Katahdin Woods and Water Scenic Byway. The Scenic Byway goes from the southern entrance of Baxter State Park, up Route 11, up 159, into the northern entrance. We are also on the road to the northern entrance of the Patten Woods and Waters National Monument. So it's a very heavily traveled road. We see many, many, many log trucks still coming in and out. There is still a lot of logging going on in this area.
Yeah, yeah. People think we lost that industry, and no, we didn't.
No, we have not lost it.
No.
It has changed.
It
has definitely changed, but our usage of materials have changed. We don't write as much as we used to, so our paper, the paper isn't consumed. We put vinyl siding on our buildings, so we're not using the wood products for that. We use composite decking or stone for outside areas.
Well, the point of this whole thing is that times change.
Times change.
What this is here is a look at what it used to be.
And we're here to tell the story of what it used to be.
Well, consider the story told, although we really didn't do it justice. You could spend hours looking over the photos, exhibits, antiques, and log buildings here at the Patten Lumbermen's Museum. Best thing is, there's still plenty of summer left to do it. My thanks to Ron DeBrophy for the tour. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Bar Harbor Whale Watch, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Join me again every Saturday at 9, Sunday at 8, and online afterwards at 929theticket.com. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.